So I'm here with Keith Barry. Keith, you're very welcome to the Body, Mind, Self podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
A lot of our listeners are going to know who you are, a good few of them. People who travel these kind of weird, obscure circles who listen to this kind of thing probably have a sense of what you do. For those of them who mightn't, or for anybody who maybe doesn't know as much about you as they think they do, who are you? What are you interested in? What do you do?
It's a good question, I guess. Yeah, I suppose a lot of people who, like us, who may not watch a whole lot of television, I certainly don't, I don't know about you,
Sure.
May not be aware of the type of stuff that I do. So I suppose, to backtrack, I'll give you a quick synopsis of where I came from. When I was 14, I bought a little pamphlet on hypnosis. And that kind of got, at the time I was practicing magic, but that was the time I really got, I suppose, excited about the power of hypnosis and the subconscious mind. So I started practicing hypnosis when I was 14 on friends and family and so on. And at the time I was doing a lot of magic as well. And then when I was 18, I went to college up to UCG, which is NUIG now, and graduated from there with an honours chemistry degree, studied science up there and graduated with chemistry. And my girlfriend, who is now my wife, she was studying psychology. So I started to read all of her psychology books when, not necessarily when she wasn't watching, but I just when I wasn't studying, I was reading her books. And I found that I was fascinated by psychology and the power of the subconscious mind. And then I became a cosmetic scientist. I did that for two and a half years. And then when I was 23, jumped into full-time as an entertainer. So entertainment being mentalism, magic, and hypnosis. And then shortly after that, just started studying how hypnosis could benefit people in a therapeutic environment. Studied with Tony Sadar here, also worked with Paul Golden when he was alive, and now I'm registered with the National Guild of Hypnotists over in the US. And I suppose I've hypnotized thousands of people, probably like yourself, over the last, I'm 40 now, so 16 years, 17 years, for thousands of different reasons, and then also for entertainment purposes as well.
That's another thing I think we have in common. You're allowed to be old as a hypnotist. So 40 is a young hypnotist generally in most people's minds. So a good career ahead of you.
Yeah,
and
it's very young as a
too.
hypnotist. Yeah, you're not wrong. I suppose hypnosis, a lot of it does come with maturity and with age. And as a young hypnotist, it is difficult to hypnotize people. Certainly at 14, I had way more failure than I did success. Even at 18, 19, 20, it was really my mid-20s, I started having a lot of success with it. And then late 20s, started doing a lot of, I suppose, a lot of people out there wouldn't know some of the more extreme examples that I decided to use in probably my early 30s. So, for example, on Ireland AM, and the footage exists. I'm in there tomorrow, so I should ask them for the footage, dig it out of the archives, and get it up on YouTube, because I think people will be fascinated by it. Because I basically put out a challenge. I said, look, I can cure anybody of any phobia within an hour. And that's a big claim for a hypnotist. For any hypnotist to make. And I left it up to Ireland AM to choose the subjects. So I had no control over who they were going to pick. So they picked people with extreme phobias. One person had such a phobia of snakes. You would think, okay, we're here in Ireland, you can avoid snakes.
Sure.
But if she saw a snake in a newspaper, she would freak out and have a full-blown reaction to that. And one time she was looking after her grandchild, and she noticed after an hour or so looking after the grandkid that the child was wearing a baby grow which happened to have toy snakes on it.
Okay.
But she then locked the grandkid in the kitchen, left the grandkid there while she called the parent who had to leave work and so on. So it was a big problem. And then somebody else had a massive phobia of dogs. So we took 5 of them, and then all 5 just took them for an hour a day, each one of them, and it was a huge success. And then I did an extreme one. We were talking about Richard Bandler before we came in here, and I noticed that Richard Bandler had cured somebody of a fear of flying within a couple of hours, and then brought them up on a flight and flew them. He flew with them on a flight somewhere. Paul McKenna did something similar, and then I thought, well, what's better than that? Well, I'll take 10 people who've had a fear of flying, take all 10 of them on a flight. So I did that with 98 FM a couple of years ago, and all 10 got on the flight. And happy to say I still get emails from them saying one of them actually took up flying as a hobby. So he became a pilot
Right,
afterwards, which
right.
is just an amazing experience. So I suppose that's a synopsis of the type of stuff that I've done over the years.
If you were to, go back to younger Keith, and if you were to project into the future, could you have, imagined anything like this? Was there any sense in this was the kind of thing that you wanted to do, or did you just follow your heart and it led you to where you find yourself?
I always knew that I was going to be a full-time magical entertainer.
Okay.
I don't think I would have known then at 14 that I was going to go down any kind of therapeutic route, any type of route I thought would maybe alter people's lives.
Sure.
I probably at that stage would have thought it was just for entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at the stage now where my son is 4.5. So 4.5 years ago, I hypnobirthed my own wife.
Yeah.
And if ever there's a test for your for people out there who maybe are on the fence about believing or not believing in hypnosis, and there's always that thing even between hypnotists, whether it's real or not.
Absolutely.
That for me is the ultimate, is to be able to hypnobirth my wife, and that was an amazing experience, not just for her but for me as well.
Hypnosis for you, as opposed to any other form of psychology. I mean, one appealing thing, I know for me, what really interested me about it was, I remember when I decided to study psychology, and I think a lot of psychology students, whether formally or informally, when they're studying it, they start off with an enthusiasm. They pick up the books. They realize this stuff is pretty interesting, but it's on paper.
Yeah.
There's no interaction with people. That connection and that rapport, I think, is what a lot of people want. Is that what appealed to you about it too, or why hypnosis rather than any other type of psychology, or be some other form of therapist? What is it about hypnosis?
Well, as I mentioned, I started off using hypnosis as a form of entertainment, and then it kind of naturally progressed into just using it for other things.
Yeah.
But truly what fascinates me really about hypnosis, as opposed to other forms of psychology, which I'm hugely interested in, by the way, and I consider myself very well read on all forms of psychology and philosophy and things like that, but I truly believe that a lot of the issues that people are having today can really be at least assisted using hypnosis, because habits, fears, emotions, all of these things reside on a subconscious level. If you go to certain doctors, they'll give you a pill that'll numb down whatever's going on in the brain, but it's not solving anything. And very often, I think people don't just understand how their own brain works. I actually, I was thinking about it recently. I think from a very young age, like my daughter's 8 now, I think from that age they should have curriculum in primary schools teaching people how their minds function, how their minds work, and that they can take control of their own thoughts, emotions, and feelings.
Absolutely.
And the problem is, as you know, 99.99999% of people don't realize that they can actually take control of what's going on there and help themselves.
Yes. Well, let me wholeheartedly agree with you on the educational point, because there's a huge problem here, I think, isn't it? That we don't have a clue, essentially, how our own minds work. It's not that we don't learn it as we go along to some degree, but imagine if you said, we're going to disband the education system and people will learn to read and write, hopefully themselves.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't happen, and if it did, there'd be a massive inequality in it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You're absolutely right, that education, long may that, come and
I'm
come soon.
I'm already teaching my kids two things. I'm teaching them one, to think outside of the box, and then the second thing I'm teaching them is about psychology and about how their brains work.
Yeah.
And I think it's massively important. Like, my 8-year-old now, I taught her when she was 4, I think it was, to say the alphabet backwards.
Right.
And so I got a call from the school, and it was a whole thing. It turned into a whole thing because I talked about it on radio, and I won't get into it now, but I was like, listen, she's just learning a little bit differently than you guys there in school. And the teacher was like, well, what do you mean? I said, here's what I mean. I don't want her thinking linearly. I want her thinking outside of the box, even from a very young age. Like today, I paid her €2 to she's big into art. I said, but you're learning from books and you're learning from YouTube and whatever, but I want original art now from your brain. So I'll pay you €2 to draw me something from your brain.
Right.
But it has to be relevant to me. So I said it needs to be for me. So it can be anything with my hobbies, which I go fishing and I'm on TV and whatever. So I said just there, but it's just encouraging them at a young age to think differently and think for themselves.
Ken Robinson's TED Talk, Do Schools Kill Creativity? Any listeners, check that out if you haven't.
Yeah, amazing.
It's precisely that point, and it's essential. And of course, one of the things I think you're pointing to there is the risk of being overly normative and having a sense of this is what intelligence or education means. A lot of this, of course, was set in place in the late 1800s, and it may well have worked in that context, but we need something different very often today.
Yeah, we've become a cotton wool society as well, I believe, and I don't necessarily agree with it. It's just a personal opinion. So, when my kids are doing something that necessarily is perhaps, borderline dangerous, and I'm just talking about something fun like climbing a wall, but I know, kids don't fall off walls in a general sense. They understand danger, and they need to understand danger. So, my daughter might say, "Oh, Dad, that wall's a bit high, isn't it? It's a bit dangerous." I said, "Absolutely, that's why you should climb the wall. Go climb the wall." When I put her to bed the other night, I was like, it's really late. It's way past your bedtime. If I was you, when I leave this room, I would pick up a book and start reading that book. But if I catch you, you're going to be in trouble. And she was like, "What do you mean, Dad? Now you're confused me." I said, "Exactly my point." And the reason I was doing that is for her to just lie in bed and think about, well, am I going to pick up the book? Am I not going to pick? Am I allowed? Am I not? But that's a good thing. Right. It's not confusion. It's, I want to test her a little bit. Then I went back in and said, "Are you reading that book?" And she said, "No." And then I was like, "Why are you not reading the book?" And then she's complete, "What do you mean, Dad?" But that kind of thought process for kids is actually very good, believe it or not.
Well, you're talking about something very important there, which I think is really the applied nature of this, taking ideas and really putting them into practice. Yeah. So let's get to that if we can in a second a bit more, because that's really, really important. I think it's a real key theme. Before we get to that, I'm conscious that we're throwing around words like hypnosis because, of course, we have the danger of doing that. You and I both have an interest in this topic. Our paths have overlapped. We do different things with it. We have slightly different backgrounds, but we've similar interests there in the middle of that Venn diagram. I'm also conscious that when we talk about things like hypnosis, it's rather interesting because even people who the average person on the street would consider must be experts on something like hypnosis, your local psychology professor, etc., may not have certainly not that much experience with it, but not even necessarily a huge amount of knowledge. And I don't mean to offend any of my psychology professor listeners, but this is something you see in practice. Yeah. It's a bit of a weird one in that sense. What sort of a working definition could we give to a very diverse audience as to what the hell we're talking about when we use that word?
Well, you hit on a couple of things there. I mean, we'll get to the definition in a second, but first of all, I don't consider anybody a true expert in hypnosis. We're all learning. We're learning today with technology, what's happening in the brain and so on. So I really an expert is kind of for me, it's a title that, I mean, on my posters at the moment, it says the world's #1 hypnotist. That's my marketing team. That's a whole other thing going on there to sell tickets for my live show, which is fantastic. It's on December 28th, by the way. I'm starting in Galway, and then I'm taking the north, south, east, west. Hypno Magic is the name of it. You can check out dates on keithbarry.com. But I don't consider anybody an expert, but truly hypnosis. I mean, look, it's open to definition, as you know. But for me, on a simplistic term, and this is the way I describe it, and you may have a different definition. Sure, it's literally relaxing down the conscious mind to such an extent that somebody, either the person themselves or a hypnotist, can then reprogram what's going on the subconscious level. Why do we need to do that? Because our subconscious level, our subconscious mind, controls our autonomic nervous system, our breathing, our heart rate, our blood flow, our emotions, and truly, anything from confidence to weight loss to smoking habits, fears, phobias, anything at all that with feelings, with emotions, resides on a subconscious level. And as a hypnotist, or people who want to self-hypnotize themselves, they can truly, and I can't exaggerate this enough, can truly reprogram what's going on a subconscious level to literally achieve anything that they want in life. But for me, hypnosis, shutting down and relaxing the conscious mind and igniting the subconscious mind and reprogramming what's going on inside.
It's something that really evades definition, I think, isn't it? Because it isn't really a single thing in and of itself, isn't it? It's a bit like, I often think if you have a list of, I'm obviously coming from a therapeutic background, if you have a list of therapies like counseling or cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., the list goes on. And then if you have a list of words like memory, imagination, concentration, focus, hypnosis belongs over on that side, isn't it, rather than the other one. And of course, if you try and define any one of those things, you're trying to define every other thing as well, isn't it? You're pulling an awful lot together.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, you find people who say, "Oh, CBT didn't work for me," but you equally find a certain amount of people who say hypnosis didn't work for me and I'm not going to go to a hypnotist. Well, actually, if you stop and think about it, it wasn't necessarily the hypnosis that didn't work for you. It was that particular hypnotist. And as we mentioned before, and you just mentioned a few moments ago, pretty much anybody can become qualified in hypnosis. And depending on what course you're taking, you can do pretty quickly or over a long period of time. Truly a good hypnotist it comes from experience. It really does come. And you said it earlier on. It comes from failing thousands of times and then being successful thousands of times.
Thomas Edison style.
Yeah, and it really is. And there's no other way around that.
Yeah.
And the problem is, I suppose, academically, and then even shortly when people graduate, where do they go to practice this stuff? Yeah, you practice on friends and family, and then you set up a practice, but that's not the place to practice. So it's difficult, you know.
And you see, it seems to be two extremes, which is always going to disturb me a bit. And I'm polarizing it a bit here. Yeah. It's not quite this bad, but it can be sometimes. There seems to be a danger of people who, on one hand, we really respect because they are thoughtful, they're careful in the way they gather their data. They're, real proper scientists, and they're kind of conservative in a good way. And that's great because we need those people. If you have an engineer building a bridge for you, you want that guy or that girl to do it, because they're going to be really, really careful and do that. Yet, on the other hand, when it comes to something like applied psychology, when it comes to really, whether we're talking about hypnosis or whether we're talking about anything else that's very applied, we seem to need a kind of a person who has, I don't know, a fluidity to them. Somebody who can not be too restricted by hopefully not by facts, because that matters. Yeah. But at the same time, they're not hiding behind a book in any way, and they're willing to take risks.
Yes.
What do you see in the future as the meeting point between those two things? These two people seem to be different camps sometimes, and that disturbs me.
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes academically, when people learn from certain books or certain places, they can become very, I suppose, closed in their own mindset of what they can and can't do with a certain client. I think you need to be very malleable as a hypnotist, and everything from an induction, and anybody who doesn't want to know what an induction is, it's literally the process where you're hypnotizing somebody and getting them nice and relaxed and ready to reprogram their subconscious mind. The thing is, we've got all these textbooks, and we can learn scripts from those textbooks. Certain script would suit perhaps weight loss. Another script, what's becoming very popular now, is the gastric band hypnosis, where people use it for weight loss and stuff like that. But the thing about it is, you got to sit and talk to a person. You got to find out about the person. Are they kinesthetic, auditory, visual? You got to use certain language patterns that they will accept. You've also got to get people to understand hypnosis, and you got to take time. Very often people. And of course, I fall into this category. Some of the hypnotists, especially in the UK is a minefield for this kind of stuff. The clinical hypnotherapists have a huge problem with somebody like me using hypnosis on stage as a form of entertainment.
Sure, yeah.
I think you're insulting somebody's intelligence, as a matter of fact, like the public's intelligence, by having a problem with it. Why? I think the public are intelligent enough to know the difference between me on stage as a performer and the people on stage performing in a manner that they normally wouldn't, versus being in a clinical setting and assisting somebody using hypnosis. And if that's properly explained, then there's not necessarily too much of a problem with it. But academically, I think really what needs to happen with hypnosis is, when people are learning, they need to be taught and they need to understand that, once they learn these language patterns, once they learn how to hypnotize, and after that, it's up to them to insert their own personality into it. And a lot of hypnosis is to do with the hypnotist being assertive, being confident that he's going to hypnotize the subject, and being confident that he's going to help them or assist them with whatever issue that they have.
Right.
And that's what I think really needs to be taken across through the academic world, because I see a lot of hypnotists getting qualified, and I've talked to a lot of them, and I have to tell you, I'd have no confidence in them if I went to them.
Sure.
I also think these hypnotists, and I'm just going to speak openly here on a podcast, they need to get in the gym. I mean, seriously, like if I go to a hypnotist for weight loss, and I know a lot of them, they're massively overweight. Well, how am I going to have confidence in this guy who's sitting here who's 3 stone overweight, and I'm going to you for weight loss? Do you know what I mean? So, a healthy mind, healthy body for sure.
An example I've been playing with is maybe the example of an architect who isn't as constrained as an engineer. If you get an architect to design your house, or an engineer to design your house, it's going to look a bit functional, to say the least.
There you go.
It's going to stand. It's going to stand up. But it's going to look a bit functional.
Yeah.
So there seems to be something in the middle there between, not on the other extreme either, though, where you have somebody who tries to disobey the laws of physics in how they design your house either. But where they take it, but at the same time they're looking at the personal element, and they'll have stylistic elements, they'll have aesthetic elements that are actually doing something. But the laws of physics in engineering don't necessarily contain that style within it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
It needs to be added. Yeah. So I get what you're saying. That that if we can have that flair, but there's a lot of really good work going on and good research.
Yes.
And I think it frustrates me sometimes because sometimes it sits on dusty shelves or on PDF files and USB keys rather than being taken out and used in practice in a real way.
Well, a good example, I suppose, is if you look at the history of hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming and things like that. I mean, really, I've met a lot of people who've qualified in NLP. NLP, I mean, we could talk forever about it, but basically it became a huge fad in really in the 1980s, 1990s. It's kind of waned off a little bit now, but it's still pretty popular out there. But neurolinguistic programming, and once again, it's a form of hypnosis to simplify it.
Yeah.
But really, that was relabeling of Milton Erickson's work. I mean, really, that's what Richard Bandler did and Grindler. And, they relabeled Milton Erickson's works. They took the most successful parts of it and they labeled it as NLP. So for me, I studied NLP a little bit, but I really went back then to Milton Erickson's works. Mm-hmm. And I think it's massively important to realize that the most successful hypnotists in the world, per se, are from that era, and their textbooks are what I find juicy. Because if I ask, that's what I meant to say. If I asked like 6 or 7 people who've qualified in NLP where it came from, some of them, most of them, don't even know that it came from Richard Bandler and Grinder, which is amazing to me. They didn't even know the names of the guys who wrote it, and then they certainly don't know that it came from Milton Erickson's works. Yeah. And they don't even know who he is. And I'm like, well, listen, if you go back and read his text, and then all we have to do is modernize that, and that's where the research that you're talking about comes in hugely and massively. And of course, science helps us. I'm a scientist, so I'm pro science, and I'm pro, developing new language patterns. I'm pro examining what's going on in the brain under hypnosis and things like that. Because I come from a scientific background,
I am interested in what you do because of how applied it is. You're very much out there doing it. A metaphor comes to mind for me when I think about when people talk about the use of deception. And you mentioned it a moment ago when we're talking about being on stage, using hypnosis. And as we'll get to in just a moment, hypnosis, of course, is such a broad phenomena that there's many different things that can happen within it. Of course, as I think you would agree, some of which would be appropriate and inappropriate to use in different contexts. So this is it. It's not necessarily one thing going on. But I think of if you can imagine it's say 100 years ago, and you walk into an event where there's a magician on stage, and they're sawing the lady in half. There may be a sense in which you think this is really happening. There may be some sense of mystery about it. If you then go to the local hospital and you start giving out to the surgeon and you say, for God's sake, this is only a small procedure and it takes you hours. Your man on stage could do it in moments. He could cut somebody in half. Yeah. There seems to be some sense in which, through the education of people, I suppose, we've come to know, and it's no less impressive, of course. For me, actually, it's more impressive. We're able to look at something and go, I have no idea how that was done. Yeah. Your man told me at the beginning that he was going to fool me, and he did, and that's great. There's some magic to it. As we focus on mentalism, psychology, and how the mind works, we seem to be today with psychology and mentalism maybe where we would have been with the supernatural and the lady in half 100 odd years ago. Are the audiences there yet? Because we do want to give them credit, and I think that's true to some degree. But of course, you will also have that phenomena of somebody going to the therapist and saying, look, I have lifelong depression. Can't you click the fingers in that sense? And we don't want to just send them for decades of therapy with no aim in sight. But of course, we do want to hit some balance with that. What do you think?
It's interesting, and I kind of know exactly where you're coming from. I'm on stage, I hypnotize people within 15 minutes and get them to do crazy, outlandish and foolish things. And then, of course, sometimes they go to a hypnotist, even me, and they go, well, can't you just snap my fingers? The weird thing is, in some cases, you actually can. And that's where sometimes other hypnotists disagree with me. And that's why it's open to interpretation. But I've done it. I'll give you a prime example of this. So back, I'm trying to think exactly when this was now, but probably 2008, I want to say 2009, I had my first Discovery Channel show over in the US. I had many more after that, but the first one, you can probably find this online. I did this hypnosis experiment on this guy that I'd met on the street, and it was a mind wipe. So where I hypnotized the guy and I erased his memory of basically his whole life. So he forgets who he is and where he's from. And it was for entertainment. It was for the show.
Yeah.
And then we had a psychologist / hypnotist on describing, how that happens and how it works and so on. But when we cut tape, when we finished recording, I started talking to the guy, and I realized that he had quite a bad stutter, which I hadn't noticed on camera. And then the more I spoke with him, the more he expressed that he'd had a stutter from birth, pretty much, so as long as he can remember, he had a stutter, and a really bad stutter. And his two friends were there, and I said to his two friends, I said, have you ever heard him not stutter? And they were like, no. And I said, okay, guys, put the cameras back up. I'm going to try and help this guy with his stutter.
Yeah.
And literally, I never promised the guy that I was going to do it. I just said, look, would you like me to try some hypnosis therapy with you? They didn't. The director and producers had no interest in this because we hadn't scripted for it. So they never put up the cameras. So I just did it on the guy, and I made up an induction on the spot. And this is what we're talking about, being malleable, because I'd never hypnotized somebody to get them over a stutter before. So and I remember exactly what I did. I hypnotized him. It took probably did about a 10-minute induction. And then I got him to imagine that the words were flowing out of his mouth like a river. And I wanted him to imagine that in the middle of the river there's a big blockage, like a huge big stone. And I got him to shrink down the stone slower and slower and slower until of course the stone was gone and the river was the most free-flowing river. And then I just got him to start talking. And I promise you, his friends freaked out. And then I put in the embedded suggestions that this would be permanent forever, that he would never have a problem. And then, of course, I gave him some trigger mechanisms that if he ever had a problem with stuttering again, that he could do certain things. And I got emails from the guy like 2 years later to say that he'd never stuttered again.
Right.
So that's where I say, I think, luckily for me, I don't run a full-time clinic.
Sure.
And a full-time clinic, I don't believe you can have, I suppose, you can't take chances with people. So you can't just do an instant induction and do a snap of the fingers.
Sure.
I've done it because it's been off the cuff for TV or entertainment or publicity stunt or whatever. Yeah. So I kind of dance that dance. But I do absolutely understand from a therapeutic environment, you have to explain to somebody that, it's very rare that people can go into instant hypnosis. It's very rare that you can snap your fingers and get somebody over whatever issue that's going on. And then we have to, I suppose, find that middle ground where people need to understand that you may need to come back for a course, or you may need to come back for a top-up 6 months later, or whatever it is that works for that person.
Yeah, and I suppose a lot of different things just get bundled into categories. And one way I like to think about it is, if you were going, I use this physiotherapy analogy a lot in my work, and if you're going for physiotherapy, there may be a sense in which, if the physiotherapist said, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I lift boxes and I work in a warehouse. Yeah. And they say, well, can you show me how you normally lift? And they watch you as you're lifting and they notice that you're lifting with your back instead of your legs. There is a sense in which, there's an instantaneous shift in approach that they can bring about immediately. And that literally can happen in minutes. Mm-hmm. There's also a sense in which, of course, there probably will be exercises over the course of weeks that you'd use to build up muscle tone in that sense. Yeah. And there's also kind of an educational aspect, isn't it? In the sense that the more we know about our bodies, the more we know how to use them and not misuse them. And that seems to be a very similar opportunity with the mind at the moment. So that is, I think, the greater public good, I suppose, in all of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Shrouded in secrecy a lot of the time. I don't know why, to be perfectly honest with you, but...
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, you talk about physiotherapy. I'm just straight out from the physiotherapist myself.
Perfect.
I've gone to physio for nearly 10 years now, nearly 9 years, for a car accident that I was involved in, coming back from a funeral up the north, and basically an off-duty policeman just careered from the other side of the road and slammed the head on into me. So I was doing about 60, he was doing about 60. It's a long story, but to cut it short, I broke my knee, smashed my tibia and fibia all the way down, dislocated my ankle, broke all my metatarsals, and my foot was wrapped up going the wrong way. So 3.5 weeks up in hospital, up in the Royal Vic, and they told me you'll have a permanent limp, and I just said no, I won't. And they said no, you don't understand. Your leg is that, you've got a 7-inch plate, you've got 13 screws. You're lucky to have your foot. Your foot was close to amputation. I said, well, I'm not going to have a limp. So then I had to figure out how not to have a limp. So I'm like, so I examined it. Now, so this is where it comes into just using your mind differently. I said to myself, well, where's the best physios in the world? Because the people in Vincent's, they're fantastic. I can't speak highly of them enough. Mm-hmm. My follow-up orthopedic was brilliant. But they're a lot of them are academics. I mean, they're out of college. They're kind of learning down there. They're young guys and girls. They're in their early 20s, and they're doing what they're told to do to make sure they help your leg and you don't get injured. But that's not what I needed. I needed to get rid of a limp that was told I'd have forever. So anyway, cut a long story short, I realized, okay, the best physios have to be looking after footballers, not rugby players, footballers, £100 million footballers. So I'm going to do everything I can to get to a footballer's physio. So I pulled every string I could pull and got into Anfield for physio and went to Victor Salinas, who was their lead physio at the time. He could still be there, I don't know. Hadn't walked for 3.5 months. Went over to him through Dublin Airport in a wheelchair. I had 2 crutches, and I was supposed to be able to at least weight bear at this stage. And he kind of used Reiki on me, which made me laugh because to me that's a bit wishy-washy. But people would say that about hypnosis, so it's kind of fun. Sure. So I was like, well, whatever, if it works. But then after about an hour of that, he went, you can laugh, you can cry, you can sing, you can puke, you can do whatever. Get ready. And he literally just ripped my leg every which way for 3 hours, which is what it needed.
Yes,
and the problem is a lot of academics are frightened to do that. Yeah. He's used to doing it. It comes down to experience again. He's used to doing this to footballers day in, day out. So I went back on one crutch, went back to him 3 weeks later on one crutch, and then came back with no crutches. And now I understand. I walk without a limp now. I have a limp in the morning a little bit, but that doesn't matter. But my point being, I learned myself how to fix my body. And I go to a guy in town. I came back and I rang Brian O'Driscoll. And I said, Brian, who's the best physio in Ireland? Because now I need the follow-up. And he said, go into Mark McCabe and get ready for World of Pain. And I still go for World of Pain every Tuesday. Why? Because if I don't do that, I'll have a limp. So it's the same with the mind. You know, if you have to learn, and once you learn how the mind works, and it comes down to exactly what you said, education. But there is no platform. I mean, we're talking about mental health a lot these days. And I think, obviously, it's very important to be open about it and not be closed. And talking to people helps. But by God, I don't think we'd have the problems that people have today if they just understood, even on a small level, what's going on in their systems when they're having panic attacks, anxiety, or whatever that is. And that comes from education. And it's like what you're saying, it's almost shrouded in mystery, and there's no reason for it to be that way.
If we think back historically, I mean, doctors didn't have a bacterial notion of how disease spreads. They wouldn't wash their hands before operations.
There you go.
You know, now the amount of knowledge that the average person on the street has greatly surpasses some of the medical geniuses of history. So I'd like to think, playing the long game, that something similar is happening with psychology.
Hopefully,
It's weird because, as we said, it seems to have fallen into these different camps of sort of renegade practitioners who will sort of make things up on the spot to a fault, and academics who will do nothing to a fault. And it would be lovely to think that in the middle between those 2 points, some magic can happen. What interests me about your work in watching your shows is a couple of things I see. There's deception, there's misdirection, there's an artistry in it, which is very interesting to watch, and of course is very, very good psychology, but of course it's not always the psychology you think it is, and that's why it's interesting. It's fascinating. And that's what's fun about it, I suppose, is you can keep different audiences interesting. Some people will just be enthralled, other people will be there trying to think. You can see the facial expressions even in the audience, which is kind of fun. But one of the other things you do, which is much more, I suppose, obvious, is you just show, I suppose, failings of our perceptual system, or idiosyncrasies of it. They're not even failings, just ways in which it works. And for me, that can be actually one of the most powerful things, because people, no matter how skeptical they might be or how much they think they are in control of their own minds, there are certain things which just kind of cast a light on the degree to which actually we're not. There are systems at play there that are beyond us. How important is that in what you do, and how can we do more of that in the world to really show people directly what's going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, I use this in the talk that you saw recently, which is where I'm really fascinated now by, we're all far more alike than we are different. That's what I think. And we all like to think that we're unique, but really from all the studies that I've done, we really are pattern followers and pattern seekers, and I kind of use that a lot to my advantage in the work that I do, and I demonstrate it to audiences. Sometimes I tell them and I show them that they're pattern followers and pattern seekers. Then other times I don't, and I use it to my advantage secretly. And perceptually, we do think very alike. Like, I know if we're on a podcast here, if I get everybody out there, and this is just a simple example, if I get everybody out there, and this is a simple thing, but if I get everybody out there to think of a vegetable, most people will think of a carrot. Those who don't think of a carrot, a lot of people will think of broccoli or tomato, and that'll cover about 80% of the people that are listening. Why? It's just because certain vegetables from childhood will jump into our mind. I mean, funny enough, a lot of research has been done into that, just one thing with carrots, and nobody really knows why. But for me, it comes down to just pattern following and pattern seeking. Like the guy back there is laughing because he just thought a carrot behind the camera. And then I have lots of other examples of this. There's a thing called, you might remember the name of it now, a fascinating thing I came across there a while ago. Booba and Kiki. Did you hear of this experiment?
Which is it?
I don't know the name of the experiment, but people type into YouTube. You could do, or into Google, right? You'll find it yourself. If you type in Kiki, Kiki, and then Booba, Bouba. I can't remember the name of the guy who came up with the experiment, but it crosses language barriers too. So it's basically a shape which is kind of like, if you imagine almost like an ink blot, and then another shape which is like a distorted star. And if you put these up in front of people, and this is what's interesting about it, regardless of language, and you ask people, name one of these Booba and one of these Kiki, 99% of the hit rate is massive. Will go for the one with the ink blot will be Booba, and the one with the distorted star will be Kiki. And a lot of research has been done into that again, and they're unsure of their reasoning why. But of course, it's to do with what they think it's to do with the fact that with the ink blot, because it's circular, and Booba because the vowels and the B's, that's kind of circular. Whereas Kiki, it's sharp, so that the star is kind of sharp. But they thought that, but now that it crosses language barriers, and they ask people in Japan and China, then it confused the psychologists again, which is where I say nobody is an expert, because we're not really too sure of that.
Yes.
But I'll give another prime example. Like for me in my work as a mentalist, look, I use deception techniques, I use real psychology techniques, real hypnosis techniques to create this grey area of entertainment.
Right.
But I love getting skeptics up on stage, because I know the thing with them is I know exactly how they think. I'm not guessing.
Sure.
They think so one-dimensional. It's actually very easy for me to fool a skeptic. So I love skeptics coming to my shows. Like I say to skeptics, where's a skeptic? Stand up now. And then I just use all the techniques that I know about skeptics against them, and they end up destroyed, and they end up flipping into at least enjoying the night, if not becoming believers.
And there is huge value in that, isn't it? Because again, it's all in the act of really experiencing it. That sense in which we get immersed in things, and the perceptual errors that we can make. I mean, one example that comes to mind even just now as we're speaking is just language itself. If we think about what's going on right now, we're both making sounds. These are just sounds, with the exception of things like onomatopoeia, where, it somewhat sounds like the thing you're pointing to. Generally, there's just sounds. They're totally arbitrary. They could mean anything. But if you think about what's happening at lightning speed, every sound is associating with previous experience of these sounds. It's been constructed in real time. So I think that's as good and as simple and obvious as an example as any, the degree to which we're constructing our experience. And of course, there's advantages to that, because if we didn't have that construction going on all the time, the problem is every time we had an experience, it would be like being in a new planet with no life or no past or no memories, and we wouldn't have a clue what to do with anything. But of course, it also leaves us open to perceptual errors and assumptions and seeing things that aren't there, and all of that good stuff, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love both negative and positive hallucinations, which I create using hypnosis. Sometimes I can create those using, let's just say, magical techniques, secret magical techniques that make it look like hypnosis. And that's what really messes sometimes a hypnotist up, a professional hypnotist, because you're looking at it as a hypnotist going, well, everybody else in here thinks that's hypnosis. And you as a hypnotist, of course, you're looking at this going, well, I know that's not hypnosis, but I have no clue how the hell he's doing it.
Right.
And that's the fun part for me, is using techniques against techniques, crossing over techniques to create this mad grey area. And for me, for the most part, I'm self-taught in all these different areas,
Right.
And I remember years ago, Anthony Robbins is a good example. I remember years ago, he said, I collect results. I don't collect qualifications.
Right.
and I quite like that. Do you know what I mean? Because once you've learned a certain amount, and then it is about life experience and about, just meeting people and talking to people. I mean, that's why, I agreed to do this podcast, is because I don't interact a huge amount with other hypnotists.
Sure.
And it's not for any other reason except I'm just massively busy, and I'm just not in that world. But I do enjoy it, and I do enjoy sharing ideas and collaborating.
And I think it's so important to do. And, really my aim for this podcast is to have the kind of guests that, if you kind of add up all the guests, none of them would be happy with all of them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, that it is that broad and that diverse,
Yeah.
but within a topic area. And, you know, if in applied psychology and cognitive science we can't do that, I don't know of any other area where we could, because it is that messy in a good way.
Yeah.
And I think that is a good thing if we can draw it together. On the point, we've used the word hypnosis a lot, and it's a fair word to use. Something I'm really interested in is the degree to which, in some ways, the hypnosis is the problem. And sometimes I say that to people I work with. The problem is you're brilliant at hypnosis. You're in this trance state. You have these thoughts and these ideas. You're playing them again and again. You're believing them. You're believing them to such a degree. You're having physical symptoms of stress and anxiety, even though around you it's totally peaceful and everything is fine. So the hypnosis, you know, as we talk about it, I think is helpful, would you agree, to look at as this thing that's happening to different degrees, one way or the other. And some of the classic examples that are used are things like watching films or reading books or things like that too, where exactly there is this immersion happening. What do you make of everyday trance? Yeah,
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, another classic example is most people here are listening. They'll drive to work every day or get on a bus every day. They'll go from A to B to work.
Right.
And then if I asked them to replay in their mind exactly what they did in their car or on the bus, they wouldn't be able to. Why? Because they're actually in trance. They just get into that pattern every day of going from A to B, and they put themselves into a light, altered state of mind.
Right.
So yeah, really all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. I mean, somebody like you or I, we're just teaching people how to relax their conscious mind and their subconscious mind and reprogram what's going on in there. So yeah, I mean, you know, we're in the hypnotic state probably as much as we're not.
Right.
You know, and that's, I suppose, it's up for argument, but I would agree with you. I'd be more on your side about it insofar as the moment you're fully invested in a book or fully invested in a movie, then you're pretty much in trance. You're not thinking of anything else. You're relaxing your conscious mind, and your subconscious mind is then taking over. Because when you're reading a book and you're really immersed in that book, you're not thinking about it. You're in the moment.
Sure.
And really, that's a lot of what hypnosis is. Not everything, but it is a lot of it. And and I think we need to encourage that trance state a little bit more almost, unless, of course, it has negative connotations.
Yeah, and it seems to be both. Another analogy is there's a difference between teaching somebody how to play a particular song on piano versus teaching them the scales so that they can play any song. And there seems to be something there with absorption, immersion, presence, trance states. There's so many different terms, which I think sums up where we are as academics and practitioners, because it's such a rich phenomena. It is hard to pin down, but there is something to be said for that, to encourage people to be able to certainly immerse in things deliberately, to be absorbed in them, but also to know how to break out of that as well. And I always find when I'm working with people that it can be such a simple thing, but such a profound thing for them to realize, and I don't mean to be too esoteric in the way I say this, but quite simply that you're not your thoughts. You know, there's this sense that because of proximity, because we're so used to being close to them the whole time, that this is the way it has to be. You know, it's like the operating system, I suppose, of the computer, if we use those types of analogies. But what a liberating thing it is to realize that, well, no, you can actually think different thoughts. You mightn't have thought to think different thoughts. That's the problem with the circularity of it.
They need to learn.
But you can bring that in.
I use the same analogy. You know, I coined the term years ago. I was kind of looking for a new label for myself at the time, as opposed to hypnotist or mentalist, because people didn't understand that at the time.
Yeah.
The TV show has kind of gotten over that, the mentalist TV show.
Okay, yeah.
And people do understand the terminology. But years ago, I came up with this term brain hacker. I was the first kind of brain hacker in the world. There's a couple other guys now who coined the terminology as well. But I used to, use the same kind of analogy as you. Our brains truly are the world's first supercomputer. And just like computers, you can input information, you can extract information. Just like computers, your brain can crash and burn. Viruses can get in there. It's the exact same as a computer. And if you learn the operating system of a computer, you learn how to get rid of those viruses. You learn how to input new information. It's the exact same with the brain. And I think it's a fantastic analogy, because I think people kind of understand that, I get that now. I do get the fact that our brains are similar to computers, but I have no idea how it functions. And once again, that comes from education, It's a
very helpful metaphor, I think it is, and I don't know what we would do if we weren't in the information age, but when you look back at old psychologists, they talked about steam engines and things as metaphors, so I suppose we all of us had something to work with.
I think the information age, though, it's a lot to answer for, too. I think people are just, with the advent of Facebook and Twitter and certain other things online, people are getting just slightly dumber. And I don't mean that to insult people, but I mean, if I wasn't in the, I'll be very open about this. If I wasn't in the industry that I'm in, the entertainment industry, I wouldn't be online. It doesn't interest me at all. Facebook doesn't interest me. I have a huge Facebook account. I do it every day because I have to. It's a business for me to let people know where my shows are and things like that. But other than that, I've no interest in it, and that's just me as a person. I think people get so absorbed in this stuff that they're forgetting reality. And I know we're going to talk about virtual reality in a moment, which I think, in some regards can be fantastic, but you as a hypnotist, you probably had this. People are coming to me now for addiction to Facebook, addiction to Twitter. But I think everybody's addicted. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. I gave a talk on this last week at the HR Tech Conference in Paris. And as I was talking, I used a prime example. There was somebody in the audience and she hadn't looked up once from her phone at me on stage and she couldn't hear me. I said, I want all 3,999 people to look at her right now. She can't even sense that 3,999 people are looking at her, let alone talking to her.
Nice example.
And, I think people need to actually take a reality check with all this on. Online is fantastic for research for me and you, and everything is accessible. That's brilliant. But to be putting up posts of Donald Trump and Melania Trump and this and that and the other, it's not progressive to your brain, your career, or your lifestyle. It's actually inhibitive of all that.
Well, it's what we were talking about a moment ago, isn't it? These everyday trance states. And again, that seems to be where the opportunity is for personal empowerment or leadership, to use those types of cliche terms. But there's a reality to it that we can very easily get caught up in these things, and days, weeks, months, or even years go by, and you kind of wake up in a sense, and you go, where was I during that period?
I like to stay up to date on everything that I'm sure you do as well. So I just bought Focus magazine there recently, and in Focus magazine, I'm sure you'll be able to get it when this podcast goes out. There's a report done in there that they're saying that children now are having problems with facial recognition of their parents because they don't look up at their parents when they come into the house.
Not encoding to begin with.
If you think that's not a problem, then you have a problem out there. For me, on a stage show last year, I used to do this thing at the very start where I would get, I throw out a piece of paper at the audience. I get 3 people to write down 3 three-digit numbers. So let's just say 396, 175, and 430, whatever it is. Okay, so just 3 three-digit numbers. And then I would get somebody up on stage at random just to add up the three-digit numbers. That's all they would have to do, add them up. And then I would give the piece of paper to somebody. Now, if the person up on stage was under the age of 30, I would turn to the audience and I would say, now this person's going to be nervous and so on, but I'm just letting you know now, they won't be able to add those 3 numbers up. They will not be able to add them up. Why? Because they're under 30 and they use their iPhones to add. They won't, and you want to see what they use. These people
remembering phone numbers as well, isn't it?
Oh, it's crazy. These people would try to add up the numbers. They're trying to add up the numbers across to the right hand side as opposed to, I was like, what the? And then I would just say, hands up if you're over 50. Yeah, can you come up on stage? Can you add those up? No problem. Done in a heartbeat. But that's what I mean. I mean, that to me is quite frightening. That we can't add, we can't function. We're getting cars now that can drive themselves. Of course, that's going to be, I suppose, helpful and beneficial. But we got to be careful with this stuff too.
That does lead us nicely into virtual reality because it's only getting worse or better depending on what your position is.
We have to embrace it, but then we have to be careful of it too. So it's that dance, you know what I mean?
It is a dance. A lovely word that Jean Piaget is. He worked a lot with children in psychology, and he came a lot of the kind of the tests or the metrics used for childhood development today came from his work. And a great word he used was equilibration, and he used it to talk about this kind of dance, this balance between, on one hand, this real concrete sense of how the world is, and on the other hand, ideas and imagination and kind of getting lost in them. So, of course, if we get lost in imagination, that's good in some ways because there's a creativity to it. But the problem is, of course, you can alienate yourself from the world you're in, which is exactly what you're talking about. The other issue, of course, is not just are we getting immersed in ideas, but what ideas are we getting immersed in? And I think just the word is consent, isn't it? Are we consensually becoming entranced and immersed in things, because
Yeah.
that's cool. That's what happens when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
choose
yeah.
a film versus leave the thing on constantly, isn't it?
yeah,
There's
yeah.
a difference there. So, but of course, the other hand, if you imagine being so concrete that you can only see the world in front of you and you can never imagine anything beyond it,
Yeah.
there's no innovation, there's no creativity,
Absolutely,
nothing
yes.
happens beyond that. So it's a helpful word, and I think it's a word that's going to be more necessary over the time that comes. We'll unpack what virtual reality is. What is your sense of what you've come upon so far in terms of virtual reality?
Well, I'm a little bit of a technophobe, if I'm honest, so I'm probably a little bit behind in this world. But
That may be a good thing. It may be
yeah,
a quality
I'll be honest,
nowadays.
like
yeah.
I just said, I'd be off Facebook, Twitter, I'd be off all of them. I'm a
Yeah.
huge fisherman, angler, so that's my thing.
Okay.
But to get back to virtual reality, I have studied a bit, but more importantly, the first real proper virtual reality experience that I had was very recently. I worked on the movies Now You See Me, so 2 of them have gone out, and they're magic and mentalism movies with Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine and Woody Harrelson and so on. So I was involved in the script of those and then the writing of them, and then worked with the actors. But the director, John Chu, he's a massive into technology. You know, he's got the latest iPhone, and he'd stay up late at night, and he'll buy the iPhone 8, whatever's going on. So I was out in his house recently in LA, and he put me into this virtual reality world. And it's the first time, of course, we've all experienced virtual reality on some level, but this was the first time I was in a real proper modern system, let's put it. And my God, it did open up my eyes a little bit. I was fascinated by this world. And then, probably like yourself, I immediately started thinking, well, how can we apply this in a positive manner and utilize it in my world? And I haven't figured that out yet. But when I was in there, I did forget about reality.
Yeah, right.
Okay, which I guess what is the point of it. And it wasn't a game that we were playing. He gave me these 2 sticks in my hands. I don't know the name, sensors or whatever.
Yes, motion controllers. Controllers.
And basically, I was building my own virtual reality world, and it was a 360-degree experience. And then, if you walk near walls, this red thing comes up to let you know, because it senses that you're near a wall, so you're not going to walk in and hit your head or whatever. And it was amazing to me. And after that, I don't really know how we can apply it in our worlds, because it's so new, I suppose. But you probably have more thoughts on that than me.
It's stretching the imagination, isn't it? And I think that's the exciting thing about it, because there has been, I don't know, I don't want to say for a while there's been any gaps. Life is going on as it needs to. It's rich and it's interesting, but in terms of technologies are really looking at the world in very different ways. I think we were due something like this. And what interested me most about VR when I started trying it, and by the way, we're obviously going to have you over to our VR lab now shortly to check out some of the stuff that's going over here at UCD.
Because when I was with John, I had a couple of beers and we were just messing around, whereas now I've got my academic hat on, so I'll be in there thinking, how can we apply this?
Really unpack it a bit more, and and I was very interested to get your thoughts on it as well as everything else, because it is a little bit of a new frontier, and that's what's exciting. It's like the old west when it comes to new psychological breakthroughs. But what interested me most about it from a psychological perspective was not just that these experiences were very interesting, that they were cool, that they were impressive, but what actually interested me most was taking the headset on and off and moving between those worlds.
Yeah.
Because for a while afterwards, I'd be kind of having these images and I'd be remembering things and dream states, a bit of inception going on, I suppose. Yeah. And that reminded me of the work I do every day with clients in the office. So it's very interesting, the parallels there.
States, without the headset, if you like. I think for me, and I haven't given it a huge amount of thought, but for me, I think it could revolutionize the way both psychologists and hypnotists work. And what I mean by that is, if you can imagine in your clinic having a virtual reality headset, so that getting somebody to really imagine and believe that they're on a plane. For example, if they have a fear of flying. And you can have all kinds of programs in there then that they can take control of the plane, or that the plane is out of control and that they're going through bad turbulence, or perhaps, God forbid, that they may be coming into some kind of a crash landing or something. But to make that really real in their mind, because we, as hypnotists, we try to get them to imagine these things. Now, very often, as you know, some clients and some people just have a problem imagining things. I think the virtual reality world they don't really have to imagine it, because for all intents and purposes, they're there.
Absolutely.
They're in that moment. So I think it could have massive beneficial effects in the future once we probe it a bit more, marry it a bit more, and then open the discussion. Like, and obviously you're doing a lot of the research here, at least in Dublin, if not in Ireland. I don't know if there's anybody else doing the work that you're doing.
Well, there's a bunch of people doing it, but what's very interesting about it is that they come from very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
You get these computer science people, psychology people, therapy people, people in entertainment, you name it. You know, they're all, and I think that's what's really healthy about it, because you realize with this type of thing that nobody's got it cornered.
Yeah.
And nobody even, I don't think, thinks they do.
Right, yeah.
There's that much humility in it as a result. So Ernest Hemingway has a great quote, which is, the majority of the story exists beyond the page. And what that gets me thinking about is the fact that virtual reality, although in its current manifestation is a little bit new and shiny, although even that, to be fair to some of the veterans in the field, it's been around a long time over the past few decades, some really good work going back decades people have been doing on it, but it's become kind of commercially viable today, which is kind of democratized it, I suppose, a bit. But what's really interesting is, if you think about it, I suppose a book is a virtual reality device, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
You know, it's there. The old Irish shanachie sitting around the fire telling the story a few thousand years ago.
Yeah.
This is virtual reality happening because of the picturing.
Yeah.
What comes up there, though, is what happens, like in the example you gave of working with a phobia, something like that. What happens when you take some of the load off the person's imagination and start giving it to them?
Yeah.
And of course, there could be advantages and disadvantages to that. One of the disadvantages could be they're doing less work. You want them to engage more. But of course, it could be the opposite. It could be that actually by taking the cognitive load off them, you free them up to engage with it a bit more.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing your accounts, November, my accounts are coming up. If I don't try and hold it all in my imagination, but I use virtuality and computers to set it out in front of me, that's not a way for me to ignore it. It's a way for me to kind of offload so I can see it and then work with it a little bit more effectively. Any thoughts on that interplay between taking the load off imagination, putting it on technology, and the mix between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just going to have to experiment with it first and foremost. I don't know if anybody's done a huge amount of experimentation with this. What I will say is, I do find that, you know, when I'm hypnotizing people, that they do find, some people find that they just can't visualize the way I need them to visualize. Now, when that happens, I just change the course of action that I'm using with that person.
Sure, yeah.
But first and foremost, I think they have to do the work. That's the first thing. What I mean by that is, I wouldn't be a fan of taking the workload off of them. Right. Because I think people need to understand that
physio, again, isn't it? Physiotherapy.
Yeah, whatever issue that they have, they got to push through that issue, and it's going to be uncomfortable at times. Yeah. It's going to take work on their behalf. I mean, you know, take, for example, two examples: fear of spiders and a smoker. I mean, I don't think virtual reality is necessarily going to assist a smoker unless we get them to create a world where they're, seeing the brighter, greener future. I mean, we can do that with virtual reality.
They're doing some experimentation with smoking cues, like being at the bar and then refusing, things like that sometimes,
But I think smokers need to understand that, after 3 days, the nicotine is gone from their system, and then it's really a mind game. Sure. I'm doing a stop smoking seminar on December 3rd in Carton House in Maynooth. And people are saying, you offer your money back guarantee, and is it a guarantee? Well, actually, there is a guarantee. You will stop smoking that day if you do what I tell you to do. But it's going to require work. It's going to be uncomfortable. Sure. Some people, especially for the first 3 days, they're going to find that they'll get headaches, and it's not going to be nice. And you have to do a half an hour work in the morning and a half an hour work in the evening. If you're not willing to work at it, then it's not going to work.
That's not a bad thing.
No.
You imagine as a thought experiment this new device, and it's kind of like an iPhone or something, only it's even better. It also does your taxes for you. It also talks to your wife for you. It also does your laundry. It does everything. You don't need to do anything. You can simply stop living. There's a certain point when you listen to that, you go, hey, isn't it? And you feel like you're being robbed at a certain level.
Yeah, we can't become robotic. And that's why I don't think for me at least, I don't think virtual reality should take the work effort away.
Sure.
But I think it definitely can assist in, for example, if you take a fear of spiders, for example, you as a hypnotist or you're not going to have spiders, snakes, and people have weird phobias. No, just weird is the wrong word, actually. Unusual phobias, such as fear balloons. I dealt with fear balloons on RLAM. To an extent, this woman had not been at a family party or had been in a restaurant for years
yeah.
because for fear that somebody else in the restaurant might be having a party and there could be a balloon there. So these are unusual fears, but massively inhibitive in the person's life. But you know, you don't know what's walking through the door day to day, and you're not going to have all these different objects, and that's where virtual reality can really assist. And really
there's
help
room for a
visualize.
real toolkit in that. One interesting point. Lev Vygotsky is another great guy in this type of work, and he was back in the kind of Soviet era when he was doing his work, and he was very ahead of his time, really. And a point he makes, which was interesting, he was talking about people with learning difficulties, and you know, back at that time, many decades ago, could have easily been a time where people like that were marginalized. And he said, no, hold on a minute. He said, what they need is a kind of a scaffolding or a support. If you can bring in certain things for them, that will allow them to think certain thoughts they otherwise couldn't think. And we all seem to need that in different ways. I like to think that we're all stupid in our own way, and that's where community comes in, isn't it? Is that sense of mutual support.
Nobody's an expert, in my opinion. You know, I mean, some people, of course, have more knowledge, and I need to learn from those people. And then I've got a lot more knowledge than other people, and they need to learn from me. And we all need to stand on each other's shoulders to build this pyramid that hopefully, that when we get to the top, that at least the general public can then understand what's going on and in the fields of not just our world, but the virtual reality world. And that they don't just sit down in front of the TV with the virtual reality headset and just play games. There's fun in that. There's relaxation in that. There's time for that. But look, my kids are a prime example. This thing, Dan TDN. Have you heard of this guy?
I don't think so.
Have you kids?
My oldest is 2.5, so maybe I'm not there yet.
You're heading for this.
I'm still at Peppa Pig.
So you're in a lucky world with Peppa Pig. So there's this guy, Dan TDN. He plays Minecraft online, and the kids are watching the guy playing Minecraft.
Oh yes,
online.
yes,
right? The guy's making millions, and fair play to him. But like kids, all kids that I know, all my own kids and all different, they're addicted to this stuff, and they'll watch 2-3 hours of it if you let them. And that's where we have to start managing that. But we have to manage ourselves first. So we have to manage the virtual world. Like a prime example is, I meet a lot of people who are unemployed. They come to me just for help, motivation, and so on. So not necessarily even hypnosis. Just when I can, I just help people. I think that's important. Like if you have the time and if you have the knowledge and the capability to help others, then you should really do that. And I do it as best as I can with the schedule that I have. But very often with certain people who have been unemployed, they've come to me, so they give me their story. But the stories, once again, follows the same pattern. I just say to them, what did you do yesterday? Just tell me what you did yesterday. Just give me your schedule yesterday. What did you do? Well, I got up out of bed. What time did you get up out of bed? Well, around 9:30, 10. So a lot of them are that. Now, this isn't everybody. I'm just talking about the people who've come to me. And then what did you do after that? Well, I'm on Facebook. So how long did you spend on Facebook? So they say an hour. So I know that's 2 or 3 hours because they're just trying to shave off the time. And then later on, I had lunch and then, I went online, I had a quick look for a job for half an hour, fine. And then what you do after that? Well, I watched Coronation Street, and then and I'm like, well, you're all in the same pattern. You're not going to get a job. And then, well, what do you mean? You're not, you should be up at 8 o'clock looking for a job, putting on your best suit, going down, knocking on doors. You should be online for hours looking for jobs. And then after that, you should be out going for a walk to make your mind healthy. Then you should be online learning a new course or whatever it is. And then if you want, you have your relaxation time and you watch your one episode of Coronation Street. But these things, people don't need to understand they're downtime, and we all need our downtime. We all have to have a relaxation time, and that's very important. But I think a lot of people have too much of that. 9 to 5 is fine. I mean, people say, I very often get this. I get this a lot, and it's like, oh, it's very well for you, Keith Barry. You're loaded, and you're this and that and the other. And I'm like, well, hang on. First of all, I'm not loaded. I went into massive debt for the first 4 years or 5 years of my career, which I'm still paying off to this day, and I'm happy to pay it off. And then, second of all, if you want to talk to me like that, that's absolutely fine. But do understand this. My average working day is 16 hours, and that'll go up to 18 hours when I'm writing scripts and writing stuff. And they go, oh, really? I'm like, oh, no, you don't understand. 16 hours a day is my average working day. So if you want to come to me for advice, absolutely fine. I don't throw it down your throat, but just listen, and then we can talk about whether we agree or disagree. But the only thing that ever rubs me up the wrong way is it's very well for you. Well, actually, it is, because I burnt my hands in toasters in McDonald's. I was on the ships as a kid's entertainer, and then I learned, as I said, since I'm 14 about hypnosis and the power of the mind and stuff. So, and I don't say that to be bashful or boastful. I say it because I think people need to hear it sometimes.
This is another form of virtual reality, isn't it? Because that's one thing the media does, or simplifications of things. It shows their best parts. It glamorizes things that, you and I both know require a lot of work in the background.
Yeah,
it's the same. You do too. I work with athletes, and again, they think, oh, you're just a fast runner. There is a sense in that to some degree. The work that they put in, and it's funny, if you're a jumper, for example, there mightn't be much jumping going on. You should be sitting there stretching muscles in certain ways for hours on end and putting all of that leg work in.
I'm sure you, like me, you enjoy watching TV. When a sports event is on, you hear the coaches before and after a game. I love studying that stuff because even the coaches, not all of them, a lot of them fall into a pattern. Yeah. And the pattern is, the replays next week of the final, and we'll put in our best and we'll try our best. I'm like, my God, Usain Bolt doesn't say, I'm going to try my best.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's just going to win, and that's it. And he doesn't, the word try is long gone from his brain.
Sure.
All the top golfers, they don't say, well, I'm going to try my best.
Sure.
Because they work with people like you and I over in the US. Anthony Robbins has worked massively with sports stars. I worked with Scott Evans, our badminton player. This year, he's the only badminton player from Ireland to have ever won a game in the Olympics. And it was fantastic to see him do so well in the Olympics. And he understood immediately when I worked with him. And by the way, I don't take any credit for what he did. Sure. I just gave him a technique and a tool just to flip a switch in his mind.
That love, particularly when you're talking about people and their direction, and that love and that passion just seems so important in it, isn't it? And I love, that example of children playing. They're not doing it because they have to. There's not an end goal in mind as such. There's a love of it. Yeah. And you always see that, isn't it, with the best athletes, that even if there wasn't a race, they'd be running. Yeah. There's that sense in which the finish line is, sure, it's there as part of their goal setting, but in a way it's kind of arbitrary. Yeah. They run fast. They love doing it. Yeah. They win either way, in a sense, and that makes them run fast.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I love helping people. I think to always remember where you came from and appreciate it. A lot of people say that, but not a lot of people follow it. Like I had this discussion today with my assistant Jose. He's obviously Spanish, Jose. He lives in Spain, but he flies over here for all the different projects that I do. And we're only talking today, like just briefly. It's just a silly example. We were both saying that he's very well known in Spain as a magician. Now, not as a hypnotist yet, but he's kind of getting there now. And he's helped a lot of young magicians in his time over there, and I've helped a lot of magicians here in my time. And I can't remember the last time I just even got a Facebook message from one of them saying thanks, which is fine. I'm not looking for it, but it's all I do is I learn from that, and I make sure that I pass on my thanks when I can, and I remember to pass on my thanks, even because it is easy to forget. And I just like learning lessons. So the only reason I was mentioning it today to Jose was like, we got to make sure that we never forget ourselves to thank the people that helped us and appreciate. And for us, we're having a laugh. We're following our passion. Right. We're enjoying what we do. Sometimes it's massively difficult. We're dealing with difficult producers and difficult directors. When it's outside of my bubble, let's say, and outside of my control, and I can't control some TV shows that I'm on. I can't control some live shows that I'm on. What I can't do is control my actions and thoughts, my own, and the way I react to certain situations. Right. And sometimes that's difficult, even for you, for me, even when you know about your own brain.
That concept of an internal locus of control, drawing that in. It's responsibility, essentially, not to be confused with blame, isn't it? There's a big difference. Yeah. I love that captain of the ship metaphor, that there can be rough weather, but you can be a great captain, isn't it? There's something about responding to what's happening in some way, and there seems to be an awful lot to that.
Yeah, and I think once again, people just sometimes don't know how to respond to certain situations. Like I mentioned it once again, the talk that we had before. I learned from life experiences, and I've had more than my fair share of bad experiences. My wife even says it to me. She's like, "Geez, you've had a bad run of luck over time." I've had we won't. There's no point in getting into it as such, but I've had everything from my grandfather basically being murdered in his own home as a botched robbery, to my leg being mangled, to the birth of our daughter, where they ripped all the nerves in her arm and we were told it's probably permanent, but there you go, there's your baby, to my auntie. There's lots of things that happen, and we all have our own story. Everybody has problems in their lives, massive problems, and my problems are no worse than yours, and yours are no worse than mine. I said this to somebody recently. He said, well, mine are worse than yours. He gave me this really horrific story. And I said, yes, but it's terrible and it's emotional. But I said, the only thing that you can do is change your thought pattern. I mean, there's no other way around it.
Sure.
But you have to learn the tools to do that.
And that is the point. But to know that even is possible,
yes,
is itself, I think, liberating for people, that there is some room to step back to, we might as well bring the Matrix into this at some point to wake up in some sense and realize that there are options.
Yeah, in the future, virtual reality, I'm sure, will become a therapy in and of itself. Someone will figure that out. But I think...
But it's already happening. We're getting lost in thoughts. We're putting on head-mounted displays. We're reading books. We're on Facebook. It's all, there's differences, but it's the same kind of thing.
And I think people, when they get caught in a rut, whatever that rut may be, they need just... And I think everybody just kind of needs a little bit of help sometimes. I do, for sure. I'm no different than anybody else.
100%.
Like I said it to somebody recently. I said, sometimes people think that I'm Superman. I said, I actually just need to sit down and talk with you for a minute. I just need you to hear me for 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, very often, I'm talking to other people and then I realize, whoa, I need to mind myself.
I see that a lot, because often somebody will come to do some work with me and they're a specialist in some form of health or research or whatever, but they have a problem themselves in exactly that area. And funny, it can backfire the other way, because sometimes practicing what you preach sometimes can be a bit of a busman's holiday, that you're sick of the topic.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't. So there's a challenge there, isn't it?
Yeah, but like you mentioned, people need to understand that there are solutions out there. You need to find the right solution for you. That's all it is. Whether it's CBT, hypnosis, I would have opinions obviously on other areas that I think are to be avoided.
Sure.
Because just scientifically they've been proven that they don't work. Scientifically, hypnosis has now been proven to work and be beneficial. So scientists are more on the side of hypnosis than against it these days.
Well, on exactly what you're saying there, I'd like to think for anybody who is, who's listening and who's interested in this and who's looking for support, therapeutic or otherwise, that there is a nice path between, as I say, evidence-based and real-life practice that can be followed, and I really think is getting better and better as time goes by.
But even if as you mentioned, it's not even necessarily if somebody has a problem. Like, we have sports people coming to us who need assistance, need help to visualize an end goal just more clearly than they've ever visualized it, and really have a sense of belief.
Good point.
A sense of belief. So people need to understand that they can use these techniques to benefit their lives. Even if their lives are going great, you can have even a better life if you just use certain tools and techniques, visualization techniques, once again on a subconscious level. Because very often I hear these coaches in sports, sometimes I kind of laugh at it because I'm not really a sports fan per se, I don't follow Man United versus Liverpool or vice versa or whatever. But for me, the most successful teams are the teams that have ultimate belief in their coach, and the coach has ultimate belief in them. And if you look at the top teams, they don't. The coach never says, "We'll try our best, and we'll try all that kind of stuff." It's having ultimate self-belief and belief in the people that you work with, and I think that's important. For me, a long time ago, I made a real decision to only surround myself by like-minded, positive people, and I've lost some friends because of that. Of course, look, everybody has their problems, so you've got to make sure that you manage your friends. What I mean by that is, like, we all have our flaws. So I didn't just push people away because they had flaws and their weaknesses. Like, for example, you might be on a night out where a friend gets a little bit too tipsy at dinner and makes a bit of an idiot of themselves. I'm not talking about that.
You don't cut them instantly then.
No. I'm talking about people who are just consistently negative and a repetitive pattern. And you might try and help that person, and then they don't listen for whatever reason. For me, then that rubs up me the wrong way, and I'm absorbing that, and I have to get rid of it.
It's an important principle, and they talk about that a lot as being a therapist. One way they say it is that psychological difficulty is at least as contagious as working in a hospital with anything else. And it is a good meditation to have, really. One of the nice counterpoints they sometimes say there is that okay, if you want to work with people who are in a very dark place, you can do that, but you must have people in an extra good place to be able to counterbalance it.
Yes.
And that's kind of the safety mechanism, but otherwise it can be truly dangerous.
Yeah, I just think for people out there, they sometimes need to look around them and go, well, how is this person, I'm positively benefiting their life just by being their friend. I'm not talking about hypnosis now for a minute. I'm just talking about just being their friend and talking to them and helping them. And sometimes I need people to talk to and help me. But then sometimes this person's just a negative vibe, just a negative person. They're always bitching and backbiting, and you might say to them, you know, you really shouldn't talk like that. I call people on it all the time. Very often we don't do that. Like when I hear somebody talking negatively about somebody else, I go, well, actually, you know, I know that guy. He's not like that. You know, an example, I was talking to somebody the other day, and there's a TV personality that I just happened to have a drink with in the bar.
Yes.
And he left. And this other person hadn't been in our company, but they knew me, and they went, "Oh, your man over there, I can't stand him." And I said, "What do you mean you can't stand him? Do you know him?" "Oh, no, I just can't stand him." And I'm like, well, that's just not a nice thing to be saying. I was like, you've never met him, never had it, and lots of people think that about me. I get it all the time. "Oh, your man's an asshole. He's on TV. Who does he think he is?" Well, I'm not. I'm just doing my thing. I'm entertaining people. I'm helping people. If some people don't get that, that's fine.
A prophet is never appreciated in his own home.
Yeah, but I tell you, here's the weird thing. If you look at a lot of people who've come off Twitter, the public personas come off Twitter, sometimes those people might go home and have a huge like darkness at home because of that stuff. That's the virtual
reality of the media again, isn't it? The sampling.
Yeah, and they don't understand that we're people, we have feelings. Luckily for me, I've just developed over years thick skin. But I know a lot of people who don't have that, and they become depressed, like public personalities. And the trolls don't really realize what they're actually doing. They've no thought process of how damaging this can sometimes be, you know?
I think there's something very valuable in what you're saying there. There is a sense, and this comes up time and time again. I'm sure you've heard it many, many, many times when talking about mental health as a topic. There's a real danger in pathologizing it and seeing it about the difficulties or the problems or the very, very extreme cases. But the point is, this is something that is relevant to every single one of us. There's nobody, just as there's different notes on a piano, high and low, there's nobody balanced that doesn't have an emotional range. If you're not able to feel those low feelings, go and get help. In a sense. But it's, as I say, how you manage it, how you work with it. You were talking there a moment ago about kind of lessons and learning through life. A big question, I know, but as you look at your life, any particular principle or lesson or learning, anything that stands out for you that you feel has been important, that you now see more clearly than maybe you did many, many years ago?
Well, I suppose a lot of them. I have a lot of different things that I could say on that. But for me, I suppose I learned early in life, when I was 14, I was lucky that I found my passion early in life. And I do put that down to luck. I mean, I got a magic book, or magic set rather, Paul Daniels' magic set when I was 5, and immediately that bug just kind of bit me. And every year then I would get magic sets, and then when I was 14 I got the Klutz book of magic, and then I got the hypnosis book. So I was lucky that that just found me, and then I just followed it. But I remember at the time my parents were like, "Oh, yeah, this is all great, Keith, as a hobby, but you're going to college." But backwardly, in the back of my mind, I always knew what I was going to do. I knew that I was going to become a full-time entertainer. I didn't know I was going to follow on from that into anything else other than that. But I think the most important lesson that I learned is to absolutely follow your passion. And if you don't have a passion, this is the thing, people say follow your passion. And I question people, well, what's your passion? And they could be 50 years of age, and they still don't know what their passion is. And I say to them, well, look, how much time have you actually spent creatively finding your passion? And a passion is just maybe something that you like, and then spread out of that. So it could be art, but not just paint. I could say to somebody, what do you like? Well, I like going to museums, looking at art. Well, have you ever picked up a paintbrush and just tried it yourself? Have you ever done that? No. Have you ever picked up a pencil and just tried to copy something on YouTube, and then a couple of weeks later maybe just do it on your own and doodle, and then maybe you could spread out of that and look online, and this is where I think the online world is good, the virtual reality world is good, because then you can look online. Art isn't just art now. It's not just a painting on a wall. You can make a living out of putting frames around an art, become a framer, if that's the right terminology. And for me, the most important thing I learned is I've been lucky and fortunate that I found my passion early in life, and I followed that passion with 100% conviction, with a lot, and I mean massive amount of doors slamming in my faces and negative comments, both to my face and online and whatever. And I just block all that out. You have to block out the negative noise and bring in the positive noise. And for me, that's how I live what I believe is a fulfilled life. Now, there's a downside to that as well, is that I live my life at 110 miles an hour, which sometimes is just not good for you. It's not good for your body. I do go on 18 hours a day, but then I remember there was a long time that I went sick every Christmas when I would stop working. my immune system would just go, oh, this is brilliant. Keith stopped working. Well, let's shut down as well. I'd be very sick. So I've had everything from glandular fever to all kinds of other things. And it leaves you open to that. But you've got to look after yourself. And then, you've got to manage, for me, I've got to manage my family time then as well, because, you look at other people in our industry, very well-known people, and you look at them and they're divorced and their kids are in boarding schools and they don't, I look at that and I go, wow. Like if you look at the fact that I've got TV shows now in Australia and America. I've got a new one coming out in America next year. Another one coming out in the UK. But in saying that, if you look at my contemporaries, a lot of them are divorced or single or whatever it is, and they don't have a family life because they've become so obsessed and absorbed by the passion, which is dangerous.
The question that then comes up is how do you keep it together?
I think I've managed it well. I made a rule when I didn't have children. I would go to America for 3 months at a time, call my wife every day just to say hello, and then come back for a day, because at the time I might not have had a visa. I wasn't getting any paid work out there. I was just out there hunting for work. Right. Come back for a day and then go back for another 3 months. But when I had kids, that was a changing point for me. I just said, okay, and this came from me. I said, I've got to manage this. So I said, okay, Mairead is my wife's name. My rule is that I won't go away for longer than 5 weeks at a time. So after 5 weeks, either I come home or you come out to me. That's it. And actually, when I made that rule, it's pretty much worked out that in 8 years now, I've only ever had to go away for 5 weeks once, and that was down to Australia for a tour that I did down there. But other than that, I only go away for a couple of weeks at a time. And if it's longer than that, I take them with me, or we juggle it and we manage it. But I'm very conscious of that, and I'm very conscious that when I'm here in Ireland, like tomorrow morning I'm on Ireland AM, and I've got other things on, but to carve out family time. And for me, I'm best friends now with my dad. I wasn't when I was 18, 19. I was probably like any teenager, but now I see them a lot. I see my kids a lot, and then I throw myself into work, and then I have some downtime as well. And I do manage it quite well, I think.
So this balance or this equilibration, as Piaget would say, seems to be a bit of a theme in what we've been discussing. If you just stop and reflect forward into the future, where we can kind of imagine, I suppose, everything we already have, but more and more and more stuff, more and more information, more and more screens. I tweeted recently, check it out, a video where they're showing a kind of an augmented future that's not too far away, and it's mental. It really is absolutely mental. And of course, it's hard to even imagine what it's going to be. As the information piles up and the sensory stimulation increases, the potential for distraction and division of attention. With your skills, with your interests, and just your personal experience that you share there, what's your sense of what is going to be key in balancing that and staying sane through it into the future?
Well, that's a good question, because I do find that the more the world progresses and the more that we're in a virtual reality world, a technology world, the more people are going a bit nuts and they're going a bit crazy, and I think it's overwhelming sometimes. The amount of information that's there. I think a lot of people out there will relate to the fact that they may be depressed or worried or anxious, and we know that now because, look, we're talking about it openly a lot. People like Brezzy, he's come out and he's done a lot of talks, and it's very good, because I suppose a lot of people were trying beforehand, but they weren't being heard. At least somebody in the public eye can be heard.
There's a platform now.
And I think it's fantastic. But then you realize just how many people out there have problems and issues. And I think technology used the right way can help those issues, but then it can be very overwhelming. So into the future, I mean, really, who knows? But I just think mindfulness, it is a good word. We hear it being bandied around a lot, but we have to be mindful of how we use technology, and we have to be mindful of ourselves, of other people, and spend time on ourselves. I mean, it sounds like such a cliche, simplistic example, but I love nothing better than to kick my kids outdoors on sunny days, and we go down to the forest, and just get away from technology. I also ban technology from the dinner table. Simple, cliched example, but a lot of people don't do that. They sit there with their dinners on the laps, and they're mopping up the dinners. And I think the more technology progresses, I mean, you'll actually find people in 10 years' time that'll have the virtual reality headsets on at dinner, and we gotta push that away a little bit.
And that's where it gets complicated, because, when you talk about imagination, or even reading a book maybe, or even watching a screen, and then you talk about being outdoors in nature and smelling the trees and feeling the earth and all of that. Of course, what virtual reality and mixed reality is trying to achieve is this real interesting synthesis between them, where you've got tactile, haptic feedback, you've got smell sensors, where you have all of this. So this division, which at least we always would have known about, kind of starts to blend and disappear. That's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was on a ride in a theme park. It was in, I want to say, Disneyland in South LA, the one in South LA. So I was there not so long ago with kids. And we went on this ride, and it was crazy. They put us in this thing, and like that, they put the headsets, all came down. We didn't even have to put them on. They just kind of came down in front of us. Yeah. But we were on this extendable arm, which shot us out into this virtual world. And like that, they had mist and steam coming down and smells. Yeah. And I'm telling you now, for that moment, I was in another world. Like, I was gone. I was full in. Yeah. Imagination went in and wanted willingly to go in, and stayed in there for whatever it was, 5 minutes. And my 4-year-old next to me was like, "Dad, are we really in Mars? Are we on Mars, Dad?" I was like, "No, this is a ride, but enjoy the ride." Yeah. But you are blending that whole thing, and I just think, for me, I'd err on the side of, look, we got to stay real. We got to know that the table is the table. It's there in front of us. And, virtual reality will be beneficial. I'm sure it's going to become massively beneficial in not just our world, but in the medicine world, like just the world in general. But, people have to remember to take the headset off and get back to reality sometimes,
Children, and I mean a lot of younger people even, not that we're not reasonably young, but young, the internet, Wi-Fi, the non-existence of these things, how much they're taken for granted. What will be very interesting is a world where, what do you mean, there wasn't virtual reality, there wasn't mixed reality, there wasn't everything on demand, there wasn't minority report interfaces. And that's kind of the scary bit, because there won't really be any memory of anything before it. It'll become very implicit. Yes. And there won't be a notion that there can be anything beyond it. Yeah.
That's just, I mean, I've come to the conclusion that that's just the way it's going to be. I mean, my kids...
You're going to be the old guy in the corner in a few decades saying, "I told you so." Yeah,
my kids are in that world, and they actually do understand. Yeah. Like, I've explained to them, I said, you guys don't realize that when I was 16, the internet was pretty much invented, roughly around then. Yeah. And I was like... they were like, "Well, what did you do before that?" I was like, "Well, we had landlines." "What's that, Dad?" Like, I didn't even have a mobile phone. Yeah. And and to some extent, I'd be more on the hesitant or resistant sides. In other words, my kids, they've got iPads just to play with or whatever, but they don't have phones yet. They're not constantly on these things. Whereas some of their friends are going to school and they're looking down, they're playing with iPhones and whatever. And that's just me, but I do understand that, and I've come to the conclusion that that's just the world as it progresses. But here's the funny thing. I was only thinking about this the other day. Like, it literally only dawned on me the other day. Yeah. I was talking to my wife about memories and just, what's your earliest memory? And I was like,
just a quick interjection. Is she sick of you talking to her about that kind of thing?
No, because she's a psychologist. She's not a practicing psychologist, but she studied psychology and music, so she's interested as much as I am in this stuff. But we're just chatting about, the fact that, what's your earliest memory? And I was like, well, I think it's when I was kicking the nun in the shins on the way into play school, and I didn't want to be there, and she lifted me up off the ground, against my will, and I was trying to kick her and stuff. So I think that might be my earliest memory. And then it dawned on me, well, our kids don't have to think about what their earliest memory is, because when they're 18 or 19, they're just going to stick in a USB or probably a virtual headset. Think about this. Right. They'll probably be able to convert all the photographs and videos that we have into a virtual world for them, so that when they're 20 years of age, 10 years from now, 12 years from now, they'll be able to stick on this virtual reality world and probably interact with themselves when they were kids. I mean, that's where it's going to go, which is bonkers if you think, because they don't have to really remember. It's just there and accessible for them, and they're going to be the first generation of that,
That word mindfulness you use, though, does seem to come into it.
You know what I mean?
Because there's some sense of there needing to be an antidote to all of this, a sense of simply stopping.
Yeah, because it's like what you're saying. People are just they're going to stop thinking, because everything is going to work for them. The cars are going to drive themselves. Right. It will come to an extent, probably not anytime soon, but probably within our lifetime, that you'll have a virtual reality headset on, you'll think a thought, and that information, that thought will just pop up. You won't even have to touch anything.
Sure.
You know, people are now ordering all their food online from Tesco, so that gets delivered to the door. So I suppose then, you know, you get a treadmill with a virtual headset on. So why do you need to go to the forest when you can just have a treadmill at home with a virtual headset on, smell the smells, feel the feelings, think the thoughts? There's a danger in it, you know. So and we're at that stage now, aren't we?
We absolutely are. So I suppose whether it's a washing machine as technology, or whether it's, you know, futuristic self-ordering groceries, or whether it's anything else, I suppose the hope is, isn't it, that we use the time we're given back for something really, really that matters.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
To actually connect a bit more rather than
why
less.
are we saving
Let
the
technology
time?
support us rather than be the distraction.
I'll tell you, if I get to save that much time, you'll find me on the banks of the shore at 12 o'clock at night catching cod. There's nothing better than catching, in my world, than catching a 10-pound cod that you can eat for dinner, because that, you can't find that in virtual reality anywhere. You can go fishing, but you can't have the cod in your hands unless you order from Tesco's.
We have some fishing simulators over in the lab, so
I'm
you
sure
won't
you
need to
do.
leave the house anymore now to do it. How can people find out a bit more about you if they want to check up on what you're doing?
Well, all the dates for my tour, Keith Barry, Hypno Magic, are on keithbarry.com. So that I think I'm doing about 30 dates all over the country. And then keithbarryseminars.com is where you can find all the information for all the different seminars I'll be doing in the coming years. The first one is in Carton House, Imaginative, December 3rd, and that's the Stop Smoking Seminar. And that's it. So Keith Barry Seminars and keithbarry.com, or on Facebook or Twitter. Facebook is Keith Barry Official, and then Twitter is Keith P. Barry. And I'm very contactable. Like, I answer as many of the queries or questions that I get on Facebook and Twitter, and I don't have a social media person. Do it all myself.
Very nice, very nice. Well, listen, Keith, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
Really, I think it's a form of therapy for me, and maybe for you as well, to get to explore some of these
great.
topics, because we don't always get to.
Get my head into a headset now and get into the virtual world.
Absolutely. So we're going to go have a bit of fun with that. Hopefully you'll come back on the podcast again sometime in the future. We'll see. God knows, with a year from now, we'll probably have cyborg implants, and you never know. It's moving fast.
I'll stick on my virtual headset.
We'll
I'll
do
see you
remotely,
there.
exactly.
Remotely, yeah.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. Thanks a minute. Cheers.